All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the California PBIS Coalition's Recognition System webinar. My name is Josh Harrower. I'm going to be kicking us off for today's webinar along with my colleagues who you'll get to meet as we go through the presentation today. Just a little housekeeping, we're posting the link to the slides in the chat. If you joined recently, Luke is continuing to post so that as people join, they can still access that. You can also find them on our website, pbisca.org. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter. We appreciate the shout outs on social media. And you can use our hashtag PBISCA. You can use our handle at PBIS_CA. Particularly when you receive your recognition this summer, please use the hashtag or the handle as you're getting the word out. We really do appreciate that. And love to see you on the socials, as they say. Another save the date. Hopefully many of you were able to join us for our fall virtual conference. We are doing a spring virtual conference as well this year, since we weren't all able to meet in person in the fall. So we're doing a fall and a spring. That is scheduled for March 2nd from 1 to 3:45. And you can access registration information at the link posted there on the slides. So our agenda for today, I'm going to talk with you all a little bit about the California PBIS Coalition. We're going to introduce our recognition system, talk about the timelines for the recognition process. We have a new and improved authorized CPC external reviewer, or ACER, certification that we're going to share with you today. We're going to walk you through all of the criteria for receiving recognition. And we're going to share with you some resources, information on contacting your regional leads and how to get further support with this process, as well as with PBIS in general. And then we're going to set aside some time at the end for some frequently asked questions to review that with everyone before we wrap up. So a little bit about the California PBIS Coalition for those of you who have not been involved with us for very long. We did form in 2012. And our focus has really been to provide a high standard of quality of practice with regards to PBIS implementation through our regional technical assistance centers to county offices, districts, and schools across the state. Really looking to emphasize the systematic implementation of PBIS, anchored in our relationship with implementation science and lessons learned from that work. The benefits and supports that we provide to districts and schools are included here. They consist of engagement in a statewide professional learning community and a leadership network, the support of the regional technical assistance centers around the state that are supporting districts and schools in the critical features of PBIS, providing PBIS training and technical assistance, including capacity coaching and district and school training, a provision of California PBIS recognition process, and support of PBIS fidelity, which we're going to be talking about quite a bit today. Here are the members of the California PBIS Coalition's recognition work group. All of the people who have put in time to develop the criteria that we're going to be talking about today, redesign the ACER certification, and who will all be involved in reviewing the applications that come in and providing the recognition back to the schools. So big thanks to everyone on this group. And just to kind of get a sense of the scope that we're all working with together in our state of California, and how the CPC is really focused around supporting all the way down through to our over 6 million students. Just working with those regional technical assistance centers to support our 58 counties, over 1,000 districts, and over 10,000 schools, really with our goal to implement these effective practices as broadly as possible and to scale so that we have that maximum impact on those students that we all care so much about. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Ginny Joseph, to tell us a little bit about CPC recognition.
Thanks so much, Josh. Since we began our California PBIS Coalition Recognition System, we've been taking data on schools that have applied and received the different levels of recognition. And so for those of you who are familiar with the different levels of recognition can appreciate the growth here in the different bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. But for those of you not as familiar, to see the total number growing from year to year is so inspirational. People across the state are sharing how they're doing with their implementation and also with their student outcomes. So not only are we able to implement with fidelity, what that gold and platinum is telling us is that we're also able to show important student outcomes and that you all are getting really good at writing action plan items, which is one of the criteria that we will talk about today. So on the next slide, as we went into the end of last year in the spring, as you all know, we shifted. The recognition committee made a decision to shift to a different type of acknowledgement for the school year. As those of you familiar with the recognition process will know, it's quite stringent, and we knew that as schools were experiencing this, important part was getting kids connected to schools and meeting the needs of our students. So we instead had something called the Community Cares Award, where a lot of schools still applied. We had 913 early childhood education got involved. And then as a special part of that award, you as a school were able to elect a partner organization or a local business that really helped your school in keeping students connected. And so we had a lot of people come together to support our students. I'll show you a little bit more data on the next slide. This should be familiar to those that have been around for a while. So schools reporting PBIS implementation in California. We would like to say that in 2011, we establishing the CPC were responsible for this growth, but we know that there were other assembly bills, the School Climate Transformation Grant, the local control funding formula, the California dashboard that probably made a difference in our growth of PBIS implementation across our state. If you see that last bar, COVID-19, we did see a little bit of a decrease in the number of schools reporting data, but on the next slide, we're still pretty proud of the fact that 296 new schools still added despite the COVID-19 disruption. So good, kudos to all of you that know how important data are, and keep looking at your fidelity of implementation through PBIS assessment. On this slide, you'll see the schools reporting implementation, just the sheer number of schools across elementary, middle, and high school levels. And you can see, with the exception of last year, because we know we had that dip in number of schools reporting implementation, but we were really seeing a nice steady climb across all three levels of schools. Another way to look at the data is here. We're looking at, for those of you familiar with the tiered fidelity inventory, we're looking at how many schools are able to reach fidelity of implementation across tier 1, tier 2, and or tier 3. And we, again, prior to last year, were really seeing a steady climb, but impressive that those numbers were still pretty close, even with the COVID-19 disruption. So we want to bring us back to our why the coalition decided that recognition was important, this process was important in the first place. And we see the effort that schools put out to put PBIS in place and make schools great places to be for students and families. And so we see this as an opportunity to reflect and celebrate on your progress on not only initial implementation, but sustaining that implementation over time. The other nice thing that recognition does is it allows us, if there's a school in our area that wants to see, hey, how did that school in rural California California, that middle school that looks like us, how did they get silver? How did they get gold? And we can identify another school that looks like them and put them into contact with each other to collaborate. So that's another great thing about PBIS recognition. And what do you get for applying and being an award or a medal? So you will get a congratulatory email, and you'll also receive an electronic decal similar to the bottom of the slide here, and you can print any way you like. You can put it on your website. People like to put it in newsletters, post it around their building. Also, your name will be prominently on the PBIS Coalition website. If you go to our website now, you'll see names, school names from prior years. And also, we have an annual conference. It's usually in September in Sacramento, with the exception of this year. And we have usually some fun way of displaying the names. The last time we were in Sacramento, we had these giant letters pictured behind me with the hashtag CAPBIS that you could take pictures with you and your team, and that was fun for schools to celebrate that way. And so what we ask of you, we ask if somebody approaches you and says, we want to hear more about your implementation, please allow them to come in. Please talk to them about what you did. Please share your materials, your data, anything related to your implementation process that might help other schools, either in your area or with wherever. And we ask that you share that on your website, or I know in Orange County where I work, I look through the applications and I recruit schools to come and present at the coalition website or the coalition conference. Because I see all the great work you're doing, and so we please ask you to consider presenting at local conferences or events. Here's our recognition timeline for the year, and so here we are today. We're introducing the criteria. We'll get to that very soon. We do, as mentioned, we have a new external evaluator system, so we'll be talking some about that today, and we hope to launch that within the next or so. The application window will open January 25th, 2021, and there's a window close date of May 14th. We do not accept late applications, so please put that date on your calendar. It's an important one. And then for display at the California PBIS Coalition, that date is September 13th through 15th. So as of right now, we're still all planning on being there in Sacramento. Okay, so the new external evaluator system, it used to be the External Reviewer Authorization Training, or ERAT, and so we revised that. We gave it a reboot, a revamp, and we are now calling it the Authorized CPC External Reviewer. So you went from being an ERAT to an ACER, and it's a similar format. You're going to watch a video and take a short assessment. The video is different. It's a little bit in depth, and the questions are different as well. So if you were an ERAT before, you will be required to take the new training. So we ask that everybody go through the ACER training, myself included. We're all doing it. And you must have an ACER, complete the TFI with your team for recognition. So be on the lookout for more information. A link to the ACER will be in this section soon. That's on our website. If you click on the drop down to ACER, External Reviewer, there will be a link there with some supporting documents that you might want to download and have handy for when you are completing the TFI with the team. And I think I'm passing it over now to Raf.
Well, hello there. Good afternoon, everyone. So in true to PBIS fashion, we'd like to follow these three expectations of being responsible, being respectful, and being awesome. When I read "be awesome," I keep thinking of Kid President. So we got to look up to him. So I want to make sure that we're being responsible. We want to make sure that we're looking for accurate data, and just please review and double check the data and examples that you're providing. And then under respectful, just, as mentioned before, that we're all here volunteering to help you, and we're working hard to make sure that you're able to process your application, and we want you all to be successful. And lastly, for being awesome, we want to celebrate your efforts. We want your site, we want your district to be successful. And with these efforts, that's what helps build a stronger PBIS network. Okay, so now we're going to get down to the nitty gritty for preparing for your online application. So first, we get started by going to the PBISCA.org website, and you'll click from the pull-down menu, State Recognition System, to access the guidelines and to begin the process. Then you'll be identifying what we just said earlier, or ACER, our Authorized CPC External Reviewer. Make sure we have that person in line to help you throughout the process. And then prepare your school walkthrough with the TFI. We're collecting various TFI data points, which we'll begin to discuss in the following slide. And then we'll examine some of the classroom components that will be required as well. That being said, here we go. So welcome here. You've seen these already. These are our glorious recognition medals that we hope to hand out to all of the sites, many, many, many. And we're going to bask in the glow of those. And so, but before we begin that, there are some tasks that you need to complete. And here we go. Criteria number 1. I feel like I'm some game show host or some sort here. So we begin with our tiered fidelity inventory. So make sure that your TFI must be completed in person or remotely with your ACER, that Authorized CPC External Reviewer, as we said. We'll keep repeating that. So in order to earn bronze, you must submit your TFI online at the PBISapps.org, and your Tier 1 TFI score needs to be at 40% or higher. And we progress over to silver. The same process, completing your TFI, uploading that to PBIS apps, but your TFI score must be 70% or higher. So we must have 70% fidelity there. Then the difficulty increases and we get up to gold. Same process of submitting your TFI, or sorry, your application, PBIS apps. Your TFI score should be 70% or higher. And if you are a Tier 2 or Tier 3 school, your TFI score needs to also be at 70% or higher. And finally, for Platinum, same steps, submitting your app. Then TFI, Tier 1 should be 70% or higher. Tier 2 should be 70% or higher. And finally, Tier 3 TFI score should also be with 70% fidelity. So a little bit intricate there, and make sure that you look at that criteria closely and ensure that you are following that appropriately. Also, to take into consideration that your TFI must be completed within the 2021 school year. So just within this school year, we have to make sure we keep that window nice and tight. And then next, also that your ACER, your external reviewer, must have completed that training during this school year, 2021 school year, and before the completion of the TFI used for this recognition. So make sure to take note of that. Next, criteria 2. Provide your current year of major office determined referrals percentage data, or describe how participation data are collected at your site. So the intention for this is just to reflect on the data that's being collected. We know that all schools have to collect that, so we want to make sure that we are taking a second look at that. And now, because all schools need to participate in this, we're going to make sure that everyone has the same criteria. We must provide the total number of population with major referrals, so how many referrals that you have divvied out. Or if your school didn't collect ODR data during remote instruction, we want you to provide a narrative to describe how your site collected the participation data and then identified any students that were not participating in your daily instruction. And then there's a note there that you know, we want to make sure that the math adds up correctly. That's a big thing here. So for that example there, we have 82% had 0 to 1 referrals, and 15% had 2 to 5 referrals, and then we had 3% who had 6 or more, to make sure that the total population is accounted for. So now, making sure that you understand that participation, you know, there's many different avenues you can take, but it's limited, not limited to these areas or these criteria. Evidence of participation in online activities, completion of regular assignments, completion of your daily assignments, as well as contacting an LEA, a local educational agency, and the student or parent or guardian of the student as well. So then also there's a question of, well, are my schools using Swiss, or is my school not using Swiss? We'll have provided for you instructions on how to, for schools that use Swiss, there will be a link provided for you. Here, I'm moving my cursor over it. There'll be a link provided for you to go to PBIS apps, and then those who are not using Swiss, we also have a document that you can use for that, so that you could still be able to take your data, record your data, and present it to us. Okay, and now I'm going to pass the mic over to Jennifer Gately. Thank you.
Thank you, Raphael. Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and take you through the rest of the criteria today, and then we'll finish up our session with a few helpful hints as we complete this year's application process. So let's start with criteria number 3. This is a new criteria in this year's application process for recognition. And so we're going to be focusing on the connection between SEL and mental health. And we know, especially now in the response to COVID-19, that this is a really important action step. So we wanted to support that in the recognition process as well. So the intention of this item is for school and district teams to explore the interconnected systems framework. So you'll see that for this criteria, it is not necessary for the application for bronze or silver. We realize this is a new component. So the entry point comes in this year at the gold level application. So at the gold level, the team would watch an introductory webinar about the interconnected systems framework, and they would have read the 3 supporting fact sheets. To participate in the platinum level application, the team would again watch the same introductory webinar. They would review together the 3 supporting fact sheets, and in addition, they will have downloaded and explored the resource that's linked that provides additional supporting information about how to implement the interconnected systems framework. So let's take a look at what that might look like as an example. Again, to overview the process for this new criteria, you would view that webinar, complete and submit the study questions to earn that certificate of attendance, and read the 3 fact sheets that are linked in the criteria application. To move forward into that bronze, or I'm sorry, that gold and platinum level, you will have explored the interconnected systems framework. Okay, so moving on to criteria number 4. This is a familiar criteria as we look at action plan documentation. And again, the intention for this one is for fidelity in PBIS as we look at the TFI, to have data-driven improvement and to make sure that those action steps are aligned to your action plan. So as we look at the bronze and silver level, the application is the same criteria in both. So you will see for this level that you need to report 1 TFI feature from Tier 1 that the PBIS team has focused on improving, and report action steps for that feature from Tier 1, again, making sure that the action step being identified is in alignment with the action plan that's being described. As we move forward to the gold level, we are now adding Tier 2 or Tier 3. So still reporting on Tier 1, but in addition, selecting 1 feature from either Tier 2 or 3 to focus on providing supporting action steps, and again, making sure that the action item being identified is supported by the action plan narrative being provided. And then finally, moving on to the platinum level, it's expanding 1 more time, reporting on 1 feature from each of the tiers, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, an identified item for improvement, identifying a supporting action step that supports implementation of that TFI item, and again, making sure that they are in alignment with one another. So as we look at that a little further, here are a couple of examples of what that narrative might look like. So an example from Tier 1, focusing on Tier 1 team will expand our operating procedures to address feature 1.1. Danae will invite a classified staff representative to Tier 1 meetings and recruit multiple parents by June 1, 2021. So you can see which item is being identified, what action will be implemented to support that specific feature, and a timeline for when that would be completed. Again, in Tier 2, or Example 2, you can see that they've expanded this. Tier 1 will address feature 1.3 to include remote learning expectations. The Tier 1 team will include remote learning expectations in the classroom, and Danae will provide them to a faculty to review by January 1. Okay, moving on, criteria number 5. Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention and data. So the intention of this criteria is to identify current or advanced Tier 2 or Tier 3 interventions and to demonstrate how the intervention progress is monitored. So we're really focusing on this one on the student group that's being identified in that intervention and the percentage of those students that are making progress as a result of the intervention. So you can see that there's a particular note here also that these tiered interventions can also support the re-engagement strategies in Ed Code 43504. So again, for bronze and silver level, we know that this is a higher level fidelity criteria, so no application is required if you are entering in at the bronze and silver level for criteria number 5. Looking at the gold level though, that applicants would report one Tier 2 or Tier 3 intervention. You would define how the progress is monitored for that identified intervention. And you would report the number of students participating, and in that number of students who are participating, 70% of those students participating in that intervention will show an improvement of 70%. Okay. For the platinum level, expanding Tier 2 and Tier 3, but in the same process. So selecting from Tier 2, one intervention to report on, how the progress is monitored for the intervention, who is participating in the intervention, and showing that at least 70% of students responded positively as a result of participating in that intervention. Same process, but reporting that for Tier 3 as well, so reporting on both of them. So as we look at an example of that, you can see here in Tier 2 example, we're looking at check-in, check-out as the identified intervention. The way that check-in, check-out will be monitored is by summarizing daily progress report points. The student group participating in that is 45 students participating. And of those 45 students, 35 of them, which is 78% above the 70% criteria, met the daily progress goal. Okay, and again in Tier 3, you can see the intervention being identified is PTR. The intervention will be monitored through individualized behavior rating scale tools. 4 students are in the participation group, and they have 75% of those 4 students who have successfully improved as a result of participation. And moving along, we are now at criteria number 6. So we're transitioning now to looking at the evidence of academic impact as a result of implementing PBIS fidelity. So the intention here is to report the evidence of that academic impact as a consistent measure, the same measure across the current school year. And again, that current school year is 2020, 2021. And so as we look at the criteria for this one, we're really focusing in on what measure was used and the scope of how that measurement tool was used with a particular student group. So as we look at this one has taken a modification as a result of distance learning. You can see here in the bronze level and the silver level as well, it's the same criteria. So we're looking for bronze and silver level applicants to identify a formative measure. And again, as a reminder, that formative measure is progress monitoring. So it's more informal. So a formative assessment measure that the site is using for learning continuity. And we did give some examples, but we know especially now in distance learning, we tried to make this as broad as possible. So you see iReady, you see DIBELS, SRI, some other measures here, perhaps even teacher created materials, but they're using some formative measure to monitor learning continuity. As we take that over to the gold level, again, we are still identifying a formative assessment measure, But now we're looking, as we move down to level B, that there is a report of positive growth for one student group. And again, really focusing on flexibility with this, determining what that student group may be. I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. But this student group is monitored with a pre and a post assessment. So that's how we're getting positive growth. And a short narrative is provided to show how that student's access to instruction is supported through PBIS. And finally, as we look at Platinum, we are expanding the same process, but just increasing the reporting. So again, we have identified a formative assessment measure. We're reporting positive student growth, but for 2 student groups. So 2 student groups will have a pre and a post assessment. And again, we're providing that through a very short narrative on how the 2 student groups had access to instruction that was supported through PBIS. So as we look at some examples of this, just as a reminder, when we talk about the formative assessment criteria, again, trying to be as flexible as we can, this is just some examples of data sources. So including, but not limited to. Up here at the top, you can also see interim assessments, district assessments, and as I mentioned before, even curriculum-based or teacher-created assessments. So anything that you can report that's being utilized at the formative level. Examples also of student groups, again, wanting to give some flexibility in this fidelity criterion. It might be from the data dashboard as we look at English learners, foster youth, economically disadvantaged. It might also be specific grade levels or any other demographic characteristic that shows a positive data trend. And as we put all of those examples into that sample narrative, it does not have to be in a bulleted format, but you can see here, just for clarity, that the formative assessment tool that was identified was DIBELS. The student group that participated in that area of academic impact was 5th grade English language learners with oral reading fluency scores in the low risk range, increasing from 20% at the beginning of the year benchmark to 40% at the middle of the year benchmark. So that's a nice, robust description of the student group that was participating. And then the impact of their participation, we integrated specially designed academic instruction in English, those SEDI strategies, with PBIS teaching expectations while we directly taught our PBIS expectations virtually and used an acknowledgement system. We believe this is what contributed to improvement in rates of engagement in synchronous instruction. So you can see evidence of access to instruction as a result of PBIS implementation. And finally, the last one, criteria number 7, school and classroom walkthrough. Again, you're going to see a pivot here in this criteria as we really work to provide modifications to make this criteria inclusive of not only virtual instruction, but in person as well. So making a very clear note here at the top that if walkthrough visits are not allowed due to social distancing, then a narrative describing how the external reviewer verified classroom practices may be provided. So I'll give some examples of that in a moment, but first going on the idea that the external evaluator was allowed to engage in the virtual learning or the in-person environment directly, you would see from the external reviewer the same criteria at the bronze and silver level, that the external reviewer has visited virtual classrooms or in-person classrooms, but there is no data criteria. You will simply say that results are able to be used as site-based guidance. As we transition up to the gold level, again, the external reviewer was able to participate in those classrooms virtually or in person. They visited at least 10% of the classrooms. And of those 10% of classrooms visited, 80% of them demonstrated at least 3 of the evidence-based classroom practices. And as we transition that finally to the platinum level, again, going on the assumption that the external reviewer was able to access classrooms, that they visited at least 10% of those classrooms, either virtually or in person, and that all classrooms visited, all 10% of those classrooms they visited demonstrated 4 or more evidence-based classroom practices. So for some resources, you'll see linked in the PowerPoint and also available on the CPC website, an example of the modified classroom walkthrough tool. And I'm going to be showing you an example of that in just a moment. But do know that that resource is going to be linked in the PowerPoint as well as the website. And in addition, that the evidence-based classroom assessments, we want to remind ourselves, do come from the supporting and responding to behavior document. And I'm going to speak to that a little bit more as well. But you do have those links in your PowerPoint as well as on the website. And when we look at that coming together, again, I mentioned that this criteria is really written on the assumption that that external evaluator can access the classroom in some form or another. If they cannot, again, wanting to make sure that the recognition process has equity and access for all participants, giving that plan B option, so to speak. So in that option, an example of a narrative. So the external evaluator might be able to provide a narrative in lieu of the classroom visits. What that might look like is them meeting with the team virtually and gathering information in that way, or completing a classroom practice self-assessment, a virtual walkthrough where they are going into the classroom, but it is in that virtual format, or perhaps even completing a virtual interview of an identified student group or of staff. So again, trying to be as inclusive as we can. The option of a narrative is there if the external reviewer cannot access the classroom. As I mentioned, the Classroom Practices Walkthrough tool has done some revisions this year as well as a supporting document for the recognition process, wanting to be responsive and inclusive to the variety of classroom structures we know we're engaged in across the state right now. So for consistency's sake, what you'll see are the evidence-based classroom practices identified along the left side of the document. And again, as a reminder, this is linked in the PowerPoint. It's also linked on the website as well. So those classroom practices have not changed. They are still the same classroom practices that we have had in place in previous years. The physical classroom features, again, those are just recommendations. Those are examples of what those evidence-based classroom practices look like as they are implemented in the classroom. So that, again, is a piece of the walkthrough tool that is consistent from the previous year's application. Where this year's committee has worked to provide some additional resources for you is we have supported you in pivoting some of those examples of classroom features into the virtual classroom and given you some insight into what those adaptations may be. So you'll see on the far right column some examples of how that evidence-based classroom practice might look like in evidence if you were to see it or discuss it in the virtual classroom environment. So as that reminder, as you are going through this part of the recognition, that schools do have their choice when they're reporting on classroom data to either show evidence of that classroom practice in the physical or the virtual classroom environment. And they only have to select one example of evidence. There's many examples in the box. They don't need to show all of them. And they certainly would have the choice if it is evidence in the virtual environment or in the physical environment. And finally, as you are looking through that tool, if more supporting information is needed for our site PBIS teams or even our site or district PBIS coaches that are really using this PBIS recognition not as only a process to acknowledge the efforts of their school and to work towards those steps of fidelity, but truly to use it as a coaching tool to provide that technical assistance, we want to remind everybody that additional information can be found in the supporting and responding to behavior document that's found on pbis.org. And finally, as we start to bring this presentation to a close, we do want to remind everybody, we recognize that a lot of information has been shared today, and we certainly want you to know where you have contact to additional support as questions arise in the recognition process this year. So every region in the state does have a lead contact, and so on our website, the PBIS CPC website, you will see the liaison's name and contact information posted there. So we encourage you, if you have additional questions after today's training about the new ACER certification process, coaching support, or just any additional information you need to help you in the recognition this year, we encourage you to go to our website, find your region, find your liaison that's posted on that region, and then work directly with them so that you get that nice fast turnaround time on the questions and support that you need. And then finally, we're going to continue to populate, as we have in the past, a frequently asked questions document, a resource for you on the CPC website. So as those questions do come into your regional leads and they come up forward perhaps to the CPC recognition committee, we're going to be gathering frequently asked questions and answers throughout the process this year. And you're going to see that posted on the CPC website. So we also encourage you, as you look for resources and guidance in the process this year, that on the website you also look for this document. It will be populated throughout the coming months and maintained with a sense of currency so that you can use that to answer any questions that may come up in this year's process. So we know that as we do work through the process that there are some common pitfalls that we just wanted to bring to your attention. We do want everyone to be successful in the recognition process, and it is so disheartening sometimes when we hear from our school teams and our district teams that, oh my goodness, I forgot about that, or I didn't realize that. And so we just wanted to share with you some very important lessons learned. So as you are completing this year's application, please be aware of typing errors. They are unfortunate, but they do impact the success of your application. So we encourage you, before you hit submit, to review that document and make sure it is truly an accurate reflection of the application and the narrative that you're trying to share. Another pitfall that we often see, and we want to encourage you to be aware of, is incomplete answers. We know that that application format is very, very small. And so it is sometimes difficult to get that entire story in there. So we encourage you to be succinct, but to ensure that your answer is clear, complete, and comprehensible to someone that's reading it outside of your circle of implementation. And then finally, we encourage you to be very aware of action plan alignment. So that's a big one. We see that quite often. As you're submitting the information for your action plan, please check, and double check. Make sure that whatever tier you're reporting on, that the action item matches the action narrative, that there is no guessing or inference, that it's just a very clear, nice alignment there. So finally, as we begin to bring this presentation to a close today, we are done a little bit early, and I think there's some things going on in the chat box. I'm going to turn it back over to our CPC leads, if anybody else would like to chime in to answer any questions. If not, I'm going to encourage you, as we have a few minutes remaining, if you have not yet put your question in the chat box, please do so. Our recognition committee will be reviewing the chat box and providing answers to many of the questions, if they've not already been done so, in the frequently asked questions document, so that you have that information to reference as follow-up. So I'll give you just a few moments.
Thank you, Jennifer, everybody, for presenting. I know Luke's been manning that Q&A and chat box. I'm just wondering, is there anything out there that we should discuss while we're all on this call?
So Cami, there were a lot of questions in the chat that we did not get to. So what we'll do is we'll go through and post those to the frequently asked questions. So everybody, you will get an answer to your question if we didn't get to you today.
Sounds good. Thank you guys for joining us today for this 2021 recognition webinar. Thank you to all of the presenters that presented today, and thank you guys again for joining on a Monday afternoon. And we want to say thank you, and we're around if you guys need some additional support, but check in with your region leads. And first though, check in with your district coaches. They'll have additional information prior to contacting region leads. So talk to you guys later. Okay, recording stopped. At least it says it stopped. It still says recording.